Hi, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming, and really pleased that the Women's Rights Group is able to put this on today. We have a very special guest, Ms. Staci Fox. She is the president and the CEO of Planned Parenthood Southeast. It's a nonprofit organization, as you know, that provides vital reproductive health, sex ed, and information to people across Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. She also serves as the president and CEO of the Planned Parenthood Southeast Advocates, which is a 501c4 organization, and is chair of the Vote Choice Steering Committee, which is a political action committee focused on electing candidates who support reproductive choice. Staci has been a leader in the fields of family planning and reproductive health for more than 20 years, having previously served as the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood of North Florida. She is a native of, where are you from in Georgia?
Warner Robins.
Warner Robins, okay. She came back to her home state in 2013 to lead the PPSE. Since that time, she's guided the organization through numerous political attacks and economic hurdles while ensuring that PPSE's patients continue to have the high-quality reproductive health care that they deserve. Staci is a graduate of UGA. She's also an alumna of the Leadership Atlanta and Strategic Perspectives in Nonprofit Management program at the Harvard Business School. So let's give Ms. Fox a very warm welcome. Thank you.
I don't know about y'all, but we can sort of laugh when you hear people read your bio. Think, wow, that was me. How are y'all? Good to see you. Thanks for coming out today. Everyone asked when I walked in if I had a PowerPoint, so I'm sorry to disappoint you that I don't. But I'm just a little bit more of an engaged speaker. Y'all can decide on the engaging part. So can I give you a little bit of my history? I've been with Planned Parenthood for 22 years. I started when I was 12. Just kidding. But I really grew up all over. My mom likes to blame the University of Georgia for my liberalness, which is sort of funny to blame it on a big SEC school, but it's true. I graduated high school in Warner Robins, and when I got to Athens, life was a little bit different, and worldview got opened up, and I got to meet people and get involved in things that I had never before. And that started my track to Planned Parenthood. And at the University of Georgia, I became something called a pure sexuality educator. It's actually an academic course where I was trained to talk about sexual and reproductive health issues. And I was also, you know, all the typical Southern things, but also Greek. So I got sent in, I'll never forget my sophomore year, to the incoming, I guess my junior year, my incoming freshman fraternity class, all the fraternities at the University of Georgia, which is about 25% of the student population, if you know UGA. Me and this auditorium and literally a trash bag full of condoms. And after that night, it was one of those moments where I thought, if I could do this, I could probably do just about anything. So that's how I found my way to Planned Parenthood. I didn't know about Planned Parenthood growing up. I actually didn't even know about issues related to women's rights and bodily autonomy. I grew up in a really conservative family. 22 years later, my parents have still not said the words Planned Parenthood. I'm sure my mom's praying daily that I get a different job. But here I am. And I'm really excited to be in UU Church. When I started at Planned Parenthood 22 years ago, I started as a health educator, and I spent my summers teaching the sex ed curriculum that was written in concert with Planned Parenthood and UU to their youth group in the summers. It's called Our Whole Lives. If you have any kids, I don't know if y'all are doing it here, or if you need staff to do it. We have staff that can do that for you, but it's really comprehensive. It's a really great sex ed program that's sort of age appropriate, middle school to high school, that UU Church has put together. So that's kind of where I got my start. But let me back up and tell you a little bit about Planned Parenthood if you're unfamiliar. It's a little hard to be unfamiliar with Planned Parenthood these days, but Planned Parenthood is actually 101 years old. A lot of people don't realize that we're that old. We claim our founding date to be October 16, 1916 in Brooklyn, New York, where our founder, Margaret Sanger, who said some troubling things and sort of represents some worldviews that we don't really embrace now, but had it not been for Margaret, we would not be here. So Margaret opened the very first birth control clinic in Brooklyn on that day in 1916. And you may or may not know that at that time the Comstock laws were in place in the United States, which meant just handing out information related to birth control was considered obscene and illegal. I know, a little crazy. Sounds like 2018, doesn't it? So anyways, Margaret opened that clinic 3 days later. A woman came in undercover, figured out what Margaret was doing, and Margaret went to jail. And when Margaret got to jail, she talked to women in jail about birth control. So now you know where we got our history from. Here we are 101 years later, still fighting about birth control access. Sort of crazy. But we have come a long way. Certainly made a lot of progress. So Planned Parenthood Southeast, as Cannon mentioned, sounds like we have a lot of different organizations, which we do. Planned Parenthood can be a very confusing, convoluted organization. We're federated, if you're familiar with federated organizations. So we have a national office and then affiliates, and each affiliate's its own corporation. So we have 56 of those across the country, and in some places, like here, there are multi-state affiliates, and in some states, there are multi-affiliate states. Like Florida, there's more than one Planned Parenthood. Kind of depends on where you are. If you've been out west, your experience with Planned Parenthood is very different than it is here. South Dakota is very different even than here. We range from $3 million budgets to $80 million budgets. You can imagine the 80 is West Coast California. But here, Planned Parenthood Southeast covers Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. I like to call them the really easy, progressive, well-funded states. It was really smart to put all those together. And we have 7 health centers across those 3 states, which, I don't know about your perspective, may or may not sound like a lot. It's not a lot to me. We only serve about 1% of the population in need of publicly funded contraception across those 3 states because of funding and the politics. And also security. I mean, we live and work in cities and towns where clinics have been bombed and doctors have been shot, either in that city or right down the road. And it's really hard to find staff and recruit doctors. So Planned Parenthood Southeast, that's the C3. You're involved in charitable organizations. You're used to that. As Cannon mentioned, we also have a regional C4 organization that does social welfare work, meaning we're doing advocacy work. We're also endorsing candidates. And then we have a PAC in Georgia called Vote Choice, where we actually contribute to candidates. And we have a brand new PAC, actually, not even on my bio yet, because we're so excited about it. In Alabama, we've just chartered a PAC called Alabamians for Healthy Families. The state of Alabama will vote this November whether or not to change its state's constitution to declare the state a right-to-life state. So that'll be fun. But we did elect Senator Doug Jones from Alabama, so I don't know if anybody's from Alabama. I've got family there. Where are you from?
I'm actually from Columbus, but I live in Valley.
Okay. So anyways, we are doing all of those things in any given day, and really what we really call them the 3 legs of the stool, kind of the work that we're doing every day at Planned Parenthood. And I'll talk about those in a minute. We go back sort of up nationally. Some of you may know our former national president is gone, Cecile Richards. If you haven't made that mental connection yet, Cecile is the daughter of the late Governor Ann Richards. So that brings you to the understanding of what Cecile cut her teeth on and where she got all her chops from. And before she came to us, she was Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff, if you didn't know that. So we were really lucky to have Cecile for 12 years. And Cecile did some amazing things while she was with us. We, over her 12-year span, went from 3 million supporters nationwide to today, Planned Parenthood has 12 million supporters, which means our supporter list is double that of the National Rifle Association's. That's a pretty big deal. So we've been doing a lot of power building, and a lot of people criticize us for doing that work, but we wish our work was not political. We don't put it into the political frame, but we certainly go there when attacked, right? So we need to build that kind of muscle and supporter list in order to continue to do our work. So the author Anna Quinlan is actually running our search for our new national president, which we're really excited about. We have a Georgia representative, the former city attorney from Atlanta. Kathy Hampton is actually the vice chair of the national board, and she's on that search committee, so we've got good Southern roots being represented. So hopefully this fall we'll see who the new face of Planned Parenthood is. But as Kenna mentioned, I'm working here on the ground in these 3 states and have been here since 2013. And really felt compelled to come here. When I left Florida, I was also interviewing in Portland, Oregon, and all my friends said, why would you not go to Portland, Oregon? A lot easier there. But I don't know how many of y'all are from the South, but I believe that we have to stay and fight for the South, right? I'm not a lose the election, leave the country, although my partner is British Canadian, so it would be easy if I had to. But I feel like we have to stay, and if we leave, who's going to fight for those who can't fight for themselves? So I was really honored to get to come back here. So Planned Parenthood Southeast, here in Georgia, we're serving about 8,000 patients a year. Right now we have 3 clinics in Metro Atlanta and 1 in Savannah. I think y'all probably know some of this, but the South faces some of the most historical and worst health disparities in the country, right? Along with all the other disparities around education and criminal justice and voter access, and it's all linked in together, right? But Georgia, unfortunately, sometimes has the highest maternal mortality rate in this country. Women are dying just because they get pregnant in the state of Georgia. And in 2018 in the United States, that shouldn't be so. It doesn't have to be so. But here we are, limiting access to contraception. We're closing rural hospitals, so women who are pregnant can't get easy access to prenatal care. And the state actually lost its access to federal family planning dollars about 5 years ago because it wasn't doing a good job with that grant. So it's no wonder we are where we are. But nationally, I do want to mark this moment in time because some really cool things are happening right now that unfortunately I think in 5 years won't be happening because we have been investing in women's access and education. So right now, you may or may not know this, but we are at an all-time low for teen pregnancy in the United States. We are at an all-time low for unintended pregnancy in the United States, and we're at some of the lowest abortion rates the country has ever seen. And not coincidentally, we got the ACA. And 55 million women now get access to birth control who didn't have it before the ACA. And we were funding federal comprehensive sex ed programs all over the country. So it's no coincidence that those things delivered those types of statistics, right? And as we start to erode those things away, unfortunately, which is what is happening, I think we'll see those rates go back up. So I do think it's important to know where we've gotten and where we will likely end up based on policy. I mean, I don't have to tell y'all as a group of, Indivisible members, right? This is something that you're paying attention all the time, or paying attention to all the time. And I think what's most scary right now is that, Twitter is sort of the shiny ball, right? But there is so much happening behind the scenes that will take decades to repair if we can ever, right? Including court appointments and regulatory changes that are happening all over. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what we do here on the ground. I told you about our health centers here in Georgia. We serve about 8,000 patients a year. And we have 2 health centers in Alabama, in Mobile and Birmingham, and then 1 in Mississippi, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. If you know Mississippi, that's where the University of Southern Mississippi is. We're providing life-saving cancer screenings, pap smears, breast exams, testicular exams every day in our health center. We're also providing unfettered access to birth control. So I bet some of you are around when, sorry guys, this is what happens when you're in a Planned Parenthood thing. We start talking about vaginas and birth control, but it happens. Anyways, what's really cool about if you walk into a Planned Parenthood health center and a woman wants to get on birth control, she can do that today, which used to not be the case. When I started at Planned Parenthood 22 years ago, we didn't have a lot of options. We didn't have a lot of contraceptive options, and women got a pack of pills, and they had to wait till the next Sunday after they started their period to start their next pack of pills. I see some heads shaking. Remember those days? That's not true anymore. You want a shot, you want to get on a pill, you want an intrauterine device, we can do that today. And we take a lot of pride in that. You don't have to have a pap smear, you don't have to have an exam. We're going to get you right to the birth control you need, and we're going to match that with evidence-based contraceptive counseling so that you know what options are available to you, regardless of your age, regardless of your bank account, regardless of your zip code, and regardless of who you're having sex with. That stuff doesn't matter to us at Planned Parenthood. In fact, I can tell you a really cool story, which is one of the things we struggle with in the South, obviously the South deals with the inequity issues of regulatory environment and government environment, and even within our own organization we deal with this. So at our Planned Parenthood, here at Planned Parenthood Southeast, there are times when we have to turn patients away based on their inability to pay because we don't have federal or state funding coming in to support the work. But I will tell you a really cool story about what it could look like. So this January we opened a new health center in East Atlanta, some of you may know, just south of I-20. There's really nothing there as far as health care goes. We opened a new health center, and the Cox Foundation, Cox Communications, gave us a $250,000 grant to provide birth control for free at that health center. Pretty cool, pretty exciting. And on average in our health centers in most months, we will do 2 to 3 what we call long-acting reversible contraception a month, an IUD or an implant, somewhere between 3 and 10 years of birth control. When we opened that new health center and could give women access to LARCs without a cost barrier and combine that with evidence-based contraceptive counseling, we did 120 through March and have another 50 on the books. The last I heard from April and May. So the good news is women are getting access to birth control, and it's long-acting, right? And it can be a teenager up to a woman later in her fertility life, right? The bad news is those devices are really expensive for us because we don't get federal funding, which means we don't get preferential drug pricing, and they cost us $500 and up. Some of them are $700, $1,000, depending on the device, the brand. So the good news is they're flying off the shelves. The bad news is we're running out of money, right? We thought it would last us all year and we'll be done by early June. But I'm a good fundraiser, so I've already knocked on that door again to see if we can't get some more money to do that. But that's really what we're looking for. It's sort of this ACA-type birth control access for everybody. Every woman deserves that. And that's what we were demonstrating at this new health center. So I think that's really cool. I think the other thing that you probably know about Planned Parenthood, which we're really proud of, is that we provide access to safe and legal abortion care. And we aren't going to stop doing that. I know a lot of people say, well, if you only stopped, including Ivanka told Cecile, if we just stopped providing abortion, then they would make sure we got funded. But that's not who we are. We believe that abortion is part of health care and that women should have access to it. And so we're providing that in our health centers every day and fighting in courts to make sure that women retain access. You may have heard just this week, or this past week, that Iowa passed the most restrictive law in the country, a 6-week ban that their governor signed, which we will take to court for sure. Just weeks ago, Mississippi had signed the most restrictive ban, which was a 15-week ban. We took it to court and already have a preliminary injunction on that law, and we'll be actually fighting it in court in September. So we're doing that all across the South. But as I mentioned, we're not doing enough of it, and we have to think about how we do our work a little bit differently on the ground. So let me tell you a little bit about, I think, what's going on with us and what the opportunities and challenges are. So as I mentioned, in Alabama, we have this ballot initiative this year. Some of you may be familiar with that as a political tactic. Actually, conservatives have been using this tactic for years. To get ballot measures on the ballot as a way to turn people out to vote. So they can talk about the issues in their churches, or they can talk about them, in their communities in a way that's not electoral and doesn't rub up against IRS issues, but it's talking about issues that they get people out to vote on. And so they'll often put these issues on big ballot years. So Alabama, just like Georgia this year, is a full turnover, right? They've got a full race going on in November, and they passed this bill actually last year, not this year, but decided not to put it on the Doug Jones race, which I think they're probably glad for now. But it will be on this fall's ballot. And Alabama likes to change its constitution a lot, but this is a pretty big deal. And I do think that I think there is some hope here, and I know that's why, indivisible groups have come together all over the country as sort of this crack of daylight, right, that we're seeing down the road. And I think we're seeing in even places like Alabama. Now, yes, Doug Jones ran against Roy Moore. And if he was not going to win against Roy Moore, I think we were all going to give up, right? I mean, that was just horrible. And next time he runs, it won't be against Roy Moore, or it might be. I don't know. You know, that man was taken out of the Supreme Court in Alabama twice. He won that election again and became the nominee, you know, to run against Doug Jones. So you never know what Alabama will do, right? But Senator Jones would also, if he was standing here today, tell you that he knows when he runs again, abortion will be a front and center issue for him. So interestingly, we've been running focus groups in Alabama about this ballot initiative, which we thought, you know, is there even a path to victory on this in Alabama? But believe it or not, whether it was middle-aged white women who voted for Trump or millennial African Americans, everybody got the intent of the ballot initiative pretty quickly. They understood what it did. They also understood that there was no exception in the amendment. So there's no health for the mother exception or life exception or rape or incest exception. And what's resonating with everybody right now is government intrusion, right? No, regardless of party. Nobody wants anybody telling them what they can and can't do. Which is good news, I think, because maybe this is just an education campaign. Maybe we just have to tell the voters in Alabama that this is actually on the ballot, right? And then they'll know how to vote.
What does it say? What does the ballot initiative say?
So basically the initiative says that Alabama will be a right to life state. So it is what we call a trigger amendment. It won't have an immediate impact. Basically, if Roe were to ever be overturned and the power to be turned back to the states to decide about women's access to safe and legal abortion, then Alabama would have already drawn its line in the sand. And that doesn't seem to matter to the voters, which is good, right? Because we certainly don't want to start this erosion. And the other thing is that it is a slippery slope. You know, when we start talking about right to life, then we start talking about things like birth control and in vitro fertilization and other fertility treatments. It isn't just about abortion. So I think there's some good news there. And we're building the largest policy team we've ever built across these 3 states to, one, address that in Alabama. And in Mississippi this year, we're going to take on, thanks to the Packard Foundation. I know you may not know that some of these companies are investors in Planned Parenthood, but Packard, actually the Packard family, their very first philanthropic check they ever wrote was to Planned Parenthood. So they've been with us from the get-go. But they're helping us address abortion stigma in Mississippi. So you may or may not know this, but 1 in 4 women, by the time they turn 45, will have had an abortion in their life. It's a lot of women. It's a lot of people who care about those women. But we don't talk about it. We don't put it on a T-shirt. We don't post it on social media. And so we've allowed this cloud of shame and stigma to wrap around a piece of women's health care that doesn't have to be there, right? And so we have some colleagues in Maine who've been piloting this, kind of taking what we traditionally do in campaign work with neighborhood canvassing and apply that to social issues. You know, we've been doing that with Zika and some other health-related issues, but really getting to people at their doors, at their homes, to talk about some really intimate issues and see if we can't address some of this abortion stigma. I believe it actually is one of the most powerful things we can do is to be talking about abortion in a more open way. And it doesn't mean that you have to get up in front of a room and talk about it, but it does mean that you have to talk to your family and your friends and your daughters and your sons about it. Because I think by not talking about issues as we're handing it over, right, to a group of people who can use this as a reason to legislate it, right? We're really handing it over to a right-wing minority to galvanize around it because we don't. I mean, I will tell you, in my 22 years, even board members, when I got here at Planned Parenthood Southeast, you know, a lot of people say, well, if we just talked about it less. Every politician that gets elected is like, if we could just find some middle ground. We're not about middle ground at Planned Parenthood. We have drawn our line in the sand. We feel very strongly about this, and it's certainly not something we're going to back down from. I think y'all all know, too, Georgia has a big election year this year, and got some great candidates even in your own community here. So we have actually already endorsed in the gubernatorial primary in Georgia, which I know is a big, hairy deal. Everybody's got their own opinion about it, but our C4 board did endorse Stacey Abrams for governor, and I'll be working to get her elected on the 22nd, and then obviously in November as well. And then right now we're working on a whole list of other endorsements in Georgia and building a team. So as y'all know, candidates run their own campaigns, and then there's all these groups out there also working to get those candidates elected, which is something we take very seriously at Planned Parenthood. People trust us. They trust us in very intimate moments of their lives, and so they trust us when we talk to them about who's going to protect their rights when it comes to voting and elections. And so they, will trust us when we show up with our pink Planned Parenthood t-shirts at their doors and talking about who to vote for. So we are working on that program for the state of Georgia. Georgia actually has, which is pretty evolved for the South. Georgia actually has a table of organizations, has a table of C3 organizations, a table of C4 organizations, and a donor table to all look at voter engagement. So the C3 organizations work on voter registration, and the C4 organizations are working on what's called an independent expenditure campaign or program to get candidates elected, and the donor table's funding that work. So it's really cool where we're able to sit down with the Sierra Club and ACLU and even like-minded organizations like us, like NARAL, or national organizations come in, like Emily's List, and we're doing this together rather than all over each other, right? Where we're all in the same neighborhoods and you're running into canvassers from other organizations, and that just doesn't make sense. So Georgia's got this really cool backbone set up. It's still in its beginning stages, but Alabama certainly doesn't have it, neither does Mississippi. Their parties don't have it together. I don't know, you might have your own opinion about the party in Georgia, but so those are great opportunities for us this year. And you can imagine that we are about an $8 million organization on the C3 side across those 3 states. You can imagine for us, we all get pretty stretched thin, right, when there's all these new things going on. So elections in Georgia, ballot initiative in Alabama. We're building a 10,000 square foot brand new healthcare facility in Birmingham, Alabama, thanks to a donor. And all of that is going on at once, but it is an incredible opportunity to lift up the work and lean into those 12 million supporters that we have across the country. I have no doubt that, I just noticed your t-shirt, thank you. I have no doubt that Cecile, although no longer working for us, will be leaning into the midterms this fall and doing her own work to get a record number of women who are running elected this fall. Super excited. So let me talk a little bit about the challenges. Obviously, the ballot initiative is a challenge for us, but also an opportunity to build our list. Some of the other challenges really exist, as I mentioned, sort of behind the fray, behind the wizard curtain that people don't know is going on. So federally, there is a program called Title X. It is the federal family planning program that sends dollars down to the state, often to health departments, where then health departments or federally qualified health centers or Planned Parenthoods will provide access to contraception. Everything from condoms to birth control pills to vasectomies. Everything fits into that Title X world. So the grants are on 3-year cycles, and a new funding announcement just came out. And the administration behind the scenes, without any congressional action, has literally stripped the word contraception from the entire program, the federal family planning program, right? And added a new added language about sanctity of marriage and returning to family values, all of those things that you've heard before. Right, and added a new requirement that's not actually even listed in the regulations that they can't do, which basically is an effort to come at Planned Parenthood for defunding again. So they've been very clear, and it's actually come out in a lot of different places that they couldn't do it congressionally, they couldn't get us defunded congressionally, so they're coming at us this way. So that funding announcement came out, which would really inhibit our ability to gain access to those funds. So we have gone to court on that issue. We went into court 2 weeks ago, 3 of our Planned Parenthoods across the country, and challenged the administration's actions related to Title X. And this is where I think, and y'all know this as well, and this is why elections matter, not just because of who sits in the seat, but who they put in other seats, right? It's these judges, whether it's district court all the way up to the Supreme Court, that will matter and have impact for decades. So luckily, when we're filing a case like this Title X case, we can pick anywhere in the country. So we're going to go find the most amenable judge, right? And we're going to file there. But when we're talking about local issues, we don't get that option. And on the Supreme Court, it's pretty scary. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I'm looking for somebody who's going to invest in some cryogenics. I'm just interested in like dropping RBG and Kennedy into like a tank at night and just pulling them out when we need. I mean, I will give her my kidneys, my whatever she needs. Like, just keep her going. And who would have thought that we were like, oh, we can't lose Kennedy? I mean, 5-10 years, you know, none of us would have been, you know, glomming onto Kennedy in the way that we are now. But it's scary, and we don't have a lot of control over that right now, which is why these midterms are so important, and why these judicial appointments are so important, whether they're happening here in Georgia or federally. So that's one of the things that we pay attention to, and I hope that sometime soon, too, starting to see a little bit of it, that there's more accountability in judicial races. Right? I don't know about y'all, but you know, when you go in to vote, you know very little about all the judges that are yes, no on the ballot. You know about all the other candidates, but not the judges, right? We're not holding judges accountable. What they get in their seats and they just get to stay, right? Until they decide to go or nature takes them, right? So hopefully we're headed in the right direction there. I think other than that, obviously, we're watching for cases going to the Supreme Court, this Mississippi 15-week ban, that 6-week ban in Iowa, and some defunding battles that are happening across the country. You know, we're sort of hedging our bets of what gets picked up and what doesn't, and I think it's a little bit scary for us to think about those things and who sits on the court. You know, when these bills pass, it could be 2 years before it gets to the Supreme Court, and by then we could have a different vote on the court level. So those are things that we're watching all the time and trying to be a little bit prepared for. The other thing I will tell you is, just to give you a little bit more about Planned Parenthood. So there have been a couple of days in my career that I've been especially proud to work for Planned Parenthood. Getting up and going to work for Planned Parenthood every day is an honor. It sort of gets you out of bed when you get to go to work for a cause, you know, even on the really hard days. And I'll tell you, the day after the election in November 16 was a hard day. I don't know what y'all did that night, but I was up crying and making lists. My partner runs a nonprofit. I was like, what do we have to do at home? What do I have to do at work? You know, and every one of my staff showed up that day to work, which was pretty amazing. And that day, too, the day after the election, the organic Google search for Planned Parenthood increased by 300%. People came looking for Planned Parenthood. And they came looking for a few reasons. One is women came looking for the 4-year birth control method. And I'm not kidding, really. Well before this LARC project I was talking to you about, women started accessing long-acting reversible contraception because they were afraid the ACA would go away or they wouldn't get access. And, you know, that's also happening behind the scenes, right? This sort of religious refusal for employers. Now employers can do that on their insurance. They can refuse to allow for contraceptive coverage for their employees. You might not have heard that that happened behind the scenes, but it did. People also came looking for Planned Parenthood because they wanted to see how we would react, right? Because we were first on the menu. I mean, Speaker Ryan called us out and said we would be defunded before Trump was even inaugurated. So, you know, we've known we were going to fight this battle from that moment. And the other reason is, which is why I love being here with y'all and the opportunity that I've had for the last year and a half to speak all over the South, is people came out to support Planned Parenthood. I've never seen so much love and support for Planned Parenthood in my 22 years as I have the last year and a half. And I'll just tell you a few stories that will sort of make you smile. They make me smile. We've had everything from a tattoo parlor in Huntsville, Alabama, somehow raised $3,000 and sent us a check. Somebody or some people have some really cool tattoos. They didn't talk to us ahead of time, they just did it, right? Or we had a young woman whose great-grandmother, actually was the founder of Planned Parenthood in Atlanta. She's a budding actress in LA. She's in her early 20s. You know, vocal supporter, but she wrote us a $4,000 check. And she was just coming off a TV show and had that money, you know, from her show and gave it all to us. which was, I thought, a pretty big deal, and also joined our National Board of Advocates, using her celebrity power to speak out on behalf of Planned Parenthood. And that's one of my favorite, I don't know about y'all, but that's one of my favorite things in the world, is when people use their powers for good. And so I think that's really cool. We also had 25 restaurants in Atlanta come together and make these gourmet cookie boxes on their own. We literally read about it in the food blog in the AJC. Blew Girl Scouts out of the water, where they sold 500 boxes of cookies and raised $25,000 last year. Pretty cool. And then they came back and did it again this year. So if you're in Atlanta and want to know where to go eat, we have a nice list of places to tell you to support. But we also had things like this girl wrote us a letter from New York. Clearly she was not here in the South. She's in school. And she said, we've been talking about Planned Parenthood at school. Well, you know she's not here in the South. And I started doing my research, and I saw that at Planned Parenthood Southeast, she said, you don't have enough Planned Parenthoods. What she meant was, you don't have enough health centers, right? She said, but, and I think you need more. So I'm sending you my Christmas money. And sent me, or sent us her, you know, whatever the check her parents had given her for Christmas. She wanted her Christmas money to come to us. Or a patient who walked in our Savannah clinic in her early 60s, and our nurse practitioner was taking her history, you know, just like when you go to any other doctor. And our nurse practitioner realized that she had just had her mammogram and a pap smear, and her, guys, I don't even know this, but women don't volunteer to do that more than once a year. But our nurse practitioner stopped and said, well, can I just ask why you're here? Because you just did all this stuff. And the woman stopped, and she started crying. And she said, I was alive before Roe v. Wade, and I don't want Planned Parenthood to go anywhere. So I came here today to pay cash for my visit, even though I have a doctor and insurance, and to just be here in your space and be in community with you and tell you how much I support you. Or last year we got selected to be the Grand Marshals in the Atlanta Pride Parade, which I don't know if you've ever been, but it is the third largest Pride Parade in the country. And it had never happened to Planned Parenthood, so it was first here in the South. And thank goodness for sunglasses, because I must have cried that whole parade, just people cheering. Plus, we got to walk right behind Congressman Lewis. And I don't know if you've ever been around Congressman. He's my congressman, which is one of the things I get to say when people say, bless your heart for where you work and what you do. I say, well, who's your congressman? Because I bet it's not John Lewis. But I've gotten to be really good friends with him since I've gotten to do this job. But we got to march right behind Congressman Lewis, who wore his pink that day for us and his rainbow shoelaces. And I don't know if you've ever been around him, but that man is literally unstoppable. He's darting from side to side to side in the parade, just saying hello to everybody. It was a really special moment for us. He actually flew down, he and Congressman Johnson flew down from D.C. to be there in the middle of a storm, at risk of not getting back to D.C. for votes on Monday, to cut the ribbon in their new health center in East Atlanta. And they both put on their pink I Stand with Planned Parenthood t-shirts, which was pretty cool. So that's been good, right? And I will say, out of my 22 years, more often than not, when people say, you know, you're on the plane, I always sit on the window seat, and, you know, you get the, you know, Joe, Jane, Chatty Cathy next to you. So what do you do? And I usually start with that, oh, I work at a nonprofit. Because I'm stuck, I'm on a plane, I'm in the window seat. And people say, well, what nonprofit? Well, you asked, here you go. But 99 times out of 100, when I say Planned Parenthood, someone says thank you. And they have a story to tell. And really, really compelling stories. So just this weekend, two really cool things happened. One was, I had a call from my vice president of patient services Saturday morning. And we were providing abortion care at one of our health centers, and he said, we have a patient who just came in who is an immigrant. She just came from Honduras. And she came in for abortion care today and was quoted a price over the phone and still came in with not enough money to pay for her services. Is there anything we can do to help her? And luckily, I have a particular donor who gives us a designated fund to help women offset the cost of abortion care. And I said, absolutely. Cover the cost of her procedure 100%. We don't get to do that very often, but that was really special that day. Or in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where I was just on Wednesday with our staff, we saw our very first transgender patient for STD testing, which was really cool.
You had what? I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, we saw our very first transgender patient in Hattiesburg for STD testing, which I don't know if any of you have been in Mississippi, but it's even more rural than here, and being known as a comforting and welcoming place for someone to come, it feels really good. And on Thursday night, I got to be in a living room of a supporter where we do this, sort of the Planned Parenthood version of Jerry Maguire in the living room. And there was a mom and a daughter there, and afterwards the mom came up to me and she said, "My daughter would love to talk to you, but she doesn't want to talk right now." I said, "Great, here's my phone number, here's my email." And I got an email from her on Friday night, and she said, "My daughter took you at your word." And she said, "My daughter," I think her daughter is in middle school, "my daughter has decided that she's gay. And she's really scared of looking up information on her own because she doesn't want to get misinformation or judgmental information." And we've talked about sex in our family, but we've talked about it really in the context of heterosexual sex. And I don't have the tools and resources as a parent to talk to her, and wondering if we would talk to her. And I said, "Oh my goodness, of course. What an honor. I'd be happy to sit down with your daughter. I mean, I know what it's like. I mean, I came out as bisexual in college with a very conservative family. I know it with no resources. I always tell parents, if you haven't talked to your kids about sex, you should. Otherwise, they'll end up like me, where they get paid to talk about sex every day." So it's cool to get to do this work every day at Planned Parenthood. But it's not without struggle, which means that we need folks like y'all who come out like today to hear about Planned Parenthood and the work that we're doing, so that you can speak in an informed way about what we're doing. And people always ask, what can we do? What can we do to help Planned Parenthood? Now, obviously, I am first and foremost a fundraiser. It's my job to keep the doors open. We'd appreciate your philanthropic support in whatever way you want to do that, online or in the mail or at an event. We have our big gala in a couple of weeks, and we'll be honoring State Senator Nikema Williams. You might not know this, but she used to be our Vice President of Public Policy. She grew up in Planned Parenthood. We were so excited when Vincent Ford stepped down from his seat to run for mayor, like everybody else in their brotherhood, in Atlanta, and Nikema won in that special election. So she no longer works for us, but she's doing the good work for us under the dome. So I'll be honoring her, and Joan Osborne's coming to play, so it'll be a fun night. We like a party, so you can come do that. The other thing you can do is volunteer. Even here, away from a place that we have health centers, whether it's, getting involved in, we have advisory councils all throughout the Southeast that do work with us around policy issues. You probably know this, for those of you who've raised kids here in Columbus, it's that Georgia does not have a comprehensive sex ed law. Georgia's sex ed law is abstinence-based, which is kind of crazy when the CDC is right down the road, right? But we're not doing enough by our kids to inform them, right? So that's something not really easy to do, but something that a group of folks can do. We just did it in Savannah, where we actually quietly got the school board to change their sex ed curriculum to an evidence-based curriculum. We can help you do that. Or if you have places like here at UU, or groups of kids, or after-school organizations, we have a whole staff that do comprehensive sex ed every day. It's actually, as you heard, one of the things I started doing at Planned Parenthood when I started. But that's one of the things that we do, is making sure that humans, regardless of their age, have the information they need to make healthy decisions. And that starts literally at birth to death, right? And so whether it's we're teaching kindergarten kids about consent and bodies, or we're in retirement communities, because we are seeing a huge spike in HIV and STD rates in retirement communities, because these are folks who don't worry about pregnancy anymore and didn't understand the risk of sexually transmitted diseases, and HIV rates are skyrocketing right now in Atlanta, and it's seeping out, right? Very similar to what we saw in the mid to late 80s. So you can volunteer in any way that feels meaningful and connect with us in that way. And then the third thing, which I already said to you, but I will say is the most important thing you can do, is to speak up. Share your story, talk to others, talk to your kids, so that you become a mom like that mom that emailed me last week that I saw at the house party, right? Who's created this amazing, loving, and inclusive environment at home. and knows her own limitations and knows where to reach out when she needs some help. Or is working on some of the stigma that exists related to sexual and reproductive health, and can challenge that, whether in a policy space or just within your own 3 feet, right? We have 3 feet of influence in our life wherever we go, and if we could just focus, all of us, on that 3 feet, we can make a difference. So let me stop there and see what questions y'all have about Planned Parenthood or our work or what's going on with us. Oh, thanks. So maybe we didn't need a PowerPoint. Yeah.
The easy way to raise money is I go on Facebook and they say, well, your birthday's coming up. And,
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you. And they said, you want to create a fundraiser. So in about 4 days, I was able to raise $230.
That's great.
And Planned Parenthood was it.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you. I love that now, whether it's birthdays or weddings, people are doing that. Thank you.
I'm giving it to my daughter-in-law, Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio, because
That's
where
great.
she is on Mother's Day.
Oh, that's
So-
great. That's often a gift we get, right, on Mother's Day in honor of mothers. We also sent Vice President Pence about 75,000 thank you cards. Because a lot of people were giving in honor of Vice President Pence. Which I don't know about y'all, but that man scares the bejesus out of me. I don't know how I feel about impeachment because I don't want him as president. I think it's like 7 or 8 before we can get to Orrin Hatch, which not great, but I think I could stomach Orrin Hatch. So maybe 7 of them have to go get on the same plane at once. Yes.
My daughter is a physician in Henry County,
Ah, cool.
and she found out that the sex education in that county was being taught by the fake Clintons, because the teachers didn't feel like they could teach
Yeah.
sex, so they were just going to the lounge, and the clinics, what do they call?
Crisis pregnancy
Crisis
centers.
pregnancy centers were actually teaching birth control to the students, and that got changed.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm sure y'all have a couple, at least one here in Columbus, a crisis pregnancy center.
It's on Wittenberg, I think.
Witten, yeah. So, these are centers that aren't regulated, even though they're providing medical advice and ultrasound care. They're not required to have licensed staff on site, and they're not required to advertise truthfully. And the state's funding them, your tax dollars are funding them. About $2 million in a line item in the state's budget.
I was just gonna say, they made me watch this 20-minute video, and she wouldn't let me leave.
Wow.
And she sat me down and was telling me about God and all this stuff, and I was like, ah.
Right.
And she told me that the test wasn't ready yet, but it had been 30 minutes.
Yeah. That's often their tactic, or they'll date pregnancies differently, to sort of get women into this lull that they have more time than they do if they're considering pregnancies. So, yeah, it's really unfortunate. And I've heard more and more about this sex ed piece, right, that they're getting out into schools and talking about it. And listen, I think abstinence is an important thing to teach, whether you're, in middle school or you're in your 40s, right? Like we all practice abstinence for whatever reason at some point in our lives. But there's more information that people need, right? You get all those math skills because you're going to need to put them together someday. You need all these skills, right, and information about our bodies so that you can put them together and make informed decisions. So to me, abstinence is part of the curriculum, but it shouldn't drive it, right? It really should be comprehensive. And I think the other thing about, whether it's in a crisis pregnancy center or in these curriculums, they are very heteronormative, they're very shameful, and they're very sexist. There's still, even these evidence-based curriculums that come from the CDC are still really sort of slut-shaming girls and, celebrating boys. That's still happening. So I think that those are all things that we've got to figure out ways to challenge. What other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are those, you mentioned 3 clinics in Georgia. Are those the only places you can get an abortion?
So we have 4 clinics. No, you have an independent clinic here in Columbus. The woman who owns this clinic actually owns the clinic, the only abortion clinic in Mississippi, Jackson Women's. So no, there are our clinics as well as independent providers. There's actually a number of them in Georgia. There's one here in Columbus. There's another, we're in Savannah, they're in Savannah, there's a bunch around Atlanta. Not really any in middle Georgia, as you can imagine, or South Georgia. But there's a lot more access here than in most states in the South. And the other thing that's happening too, so you might have followed the Supreme Court whole women's case. That was a big win, right, for abortion care. And a lot of states are using this as proactive policy to challenge the laws on the books. And we actually have done this in Mississippi. So Mississippi legislature passed the 15-week ban. We took them to court, we took the state to court on that ban, and now we've amended the case to add all the other restrictions that they have on the books to be considered as part of this case. Because the whole women's case really struck down that requirement of, building requirements and doctors with privileges and all these crazy things. I mean, I think that doctors with privilege, I don't know if anybody's in medicine, but the whole idea of doctors with privileges is just insane. It's not as if we are, living in the time where your family doctor is the one that takes you to or meets you at the hospital and then rounds on you and cares for you and does your surgery in the hospital. That just doesn't happen anymore. Anywhere. So the idea
We're fighting for that.
What?
I'm fighting for that.
For that to happen.
To return to that.
To return to that. It would be nice, right? But in these days, it doesn't happen. So to think whether someone's in one of our clinics or anywhere else, if they needed something, it's not as if our doctor is going to be the one to meet them at the hospital. Also, the reality of abortion is that it is incredibly safe. I mean, it is statistically safer than colonoscopies. So, yeah, it's crazy, crazy. What else? Yes, ma'am.
So many of these laws, the people talk about how they're trying to protect the sanctity of life. Mm-hmm. If that's the rationale behind the law, how are they not being sued for violating the First Amendment? I mean, that's almost a violation of establishment. Mm-hmm.
Well, that and death penalty issue, right? Like, it's just this hypocritical notion, right, that we'll talk about the sanctity of life at one end of life. I don't know. I mean, I think that's a good question. I'm not a lawyer. I have about a football team of lawyers, but I'm not one myself. I think the other language that's often used is like the health and safety of women, like we're protecting the safety of women, which, as I was just highlighting, is just a farce, right? It's not as if women are unsafe. What happens is that women will become unsafe if abortion is illegal again, right? Thousands of women were dying every year when abortion was illegal, and we will go back to that. And there are still horrible instances like that happening now, especially in more rural places that have less access, where women, young, old women, older women are doing horrible things to their bodies that any ER physician would tell you about, right? So I think it's really interesting. I also think it's really interesting the power of language. I think that we as, I'll just assume all of us are liberals, we as liberals have not done as well on the language game. We end up playing a lot of defense, and when we haven't figured out how to kind of get in the space and frame things in a way that really match the value behind it. So it's kind of like the sanctity of life or the health and safety of women. It's not as if people don't believe in those things, right? And so it sounds really good. Or, when anti-abortion activists called late-term abortion partial birth abortion. That's not even real. It's not even a medical term. It's not even a real procedure, but it does create a visual, right? So I think it's an interesting time when it's sort of this war in language, for sure.
Do you happen to have?
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you happen to have numbers on at-home abortions or whatever the proper term is.
I don't, because they don't get reported.
Right.
We don't know what women are doing. I mean, I will tell you, thanks to, well, I mean, I don't know things, but because of the internet and access, right, women can access one of the two drugs that are used in medication abortion online. They can order it at home, which is not nearly as effective as the two-drug regimen that the FDA has approved. So, I mean, I'm sure that kind of thing is happening all over, especially in countries where abortion's illegal, right? There is an organization called Women on Waves, which actually gives women instruction about what to do if they can get their hands on misoprostol and what to do if it's not effective and they have to go to the ER. But I imagine that kind of thing is happening in the U.S. I mean, we hear the horror stories, right? The babies put in dumpsters and dropped off in prom. I mean, I remember when I was in Florida, probably only about 7 years ago, a college student almost bled out and died at University of Central Florida, locked herself in her dorm room. She was pregnant and went into labor and almost bled out, but didn't want anybody to know, and I think this is where that shame piece comes in, right? When we're not providing an embracing, open environment for any human who's struggling, with something as big as unplanned pregnancy.
I just want to express my gratefulness because a Planned Parenthood clinic was the first place I ever went to go get birth control. I was 17, and it was about 1981, and, I'm still a rational person, but I was like, okay, I'm going to have sex now, so I better go. And so you went into the clinic, and you sat down, and if you saw anybody that you knew there, you did not talk. You didn't make eye contact, you just sat, and you just read your, newspaper, whatever they had there. There's no cell phones.
Right.
So, but I remember that I couldn't tell my mom. She was, we were a Catholic family. I wasn't by then, but, it just wasn't something that you could do, So I went to the clinic and talked to the nurses, and then I had my first pap smear, and I was scared, but the doctor was very, good and kind and told me what was happening, and so I had to wait until I got my period again and wait to, but went on birth control, and hence, I chose when I could have my babies. Right. And even though it was a little bit scary because I couldn't do it with my mom's permission, I think I either forged the signature or my mom's, but whatever. So anyway, thank you. And I've always been a supporter. I'll always tell that story online or whatever because it's so important to be able to go someplace and trust that you're going to be taken care of, in the proper manner, that you'll stay healthy. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for trusting us with your health care. I say that to parents a lot, and I'm sure you've probably shared this with, friends who are parents, right? It's hard to think about your kids growing up and having sex. But if you can't talk to them, you want to know there's somewhere they can go that you trust, right? Which in that instance was us for you. And so I think it's just such a great thing. So I'm glad that you had that experience. Thank you for sharing
You're
that.
welcome.
Where were you? Where did you live?
Newport, Rhode Island.
Going back to the sex education thing. I was in grade school a million years ago, but in fifth grade we had just a very basic. Girls went in one room, boys went into another room, and back in the '60s they wouldn't have done anything extravagant, but at least you learned the basics. Does that not exist at all either?
Depends on the school, really. Yeah. It does in some places. Often not in fifth grade. It will be more likely in high school, a health class, a few days.
Yeah, it was followed up by health.
Yeah. My experience when I was an educator was both. I saw some fifth grade sort of puberty, classes, and then the high school classes as well. It really depends on the school, the teacher. We have a lot of, teachers are just brave, period, right? There are warriors out there. There are a lot of really brave teachers out there that are doing comprehensive sex ed in their classroom, regardless of what their school and school district think, which is great. So Georgia has an opt-out policy. So if your child is in school and getting sex ed, you should get notice at home. So if you, for some reason didn't want them to participate, or, was a situation like you were talking about, right? Maybe it's not curriculum you want them exposed to, you can opt them out. But as I mentioned, we do not have a requirement for it to be comprehensive or even evidence-based. So it's hard to often know what curriculum is being used. And the other thing is, I think we put this on a lot of teachers to teach stuff they're not prepared to teach, right? This isn't a class in college, right, where teachers learn to teach about sex ed, where we have, staff who are, have MPHs and that this is what they've done their whole life. I think there's some skill to it. I think it's interesting. So when I was an educator, I had schools that did both, right? Did what you said, which is separate the boys and girls and have them, and had them together. And I think both are good, and I think both should happen, not one or the other. Because I think when you separate the boys and the girls, one, you're buying into like traditional gender identity, right? And two, you're creating all this stigma, like what's secret and dirty and whatever being talked about in this room, and then it just plays out on the playground, right? So I think it's important to talk about both. But I think that it's one of the things as community activists, you can be, what is happening in your schools, and if it's not what you want, it's in your power to get it changed and address it. I'll never forget one of my favorite moments. I was in a 5th grade class, it was co-ed, and there was this little boy at the front, he had Coke bottle glasses. And this was old school, there was no PowerPoint, I had a flip chart. And I was just doing the, anatomy and physiology. And I was doing female anatomy, and I flipped to a picture of the vulva, and this little boy went, "Sweet Jesus." But literally in that same classroom, there was that little boy, and then there was a girl in the class who said, "What happens when your man says he's too big for a condom?" All of that in a 5th grade classroom. So that's why I think it's so important to be dealing with this. One, so that little boy isn't afraid of what he's looking at. And two, so that girl actually understands consent and her own power and, all of those things. So I think it's, oh God, I can't even imagine. I don't have kids. I can barely dress myself in the morning, but I think it'd be really hard raising kids because of the internet and all this access to information. All my friends are, their kids are young and getting access to porn and things like that on the internet. And as much as you protect them, they're going to interact with other kids at school. It's really hard. And so that's why I think creating this, I sort of call it askable parent, environment at home is so important so that your kids or grandkids or whoever, your nieces and nephews, have a safe place to talk to you about what they're seeing and what they're hearing, because it's so often wrong, right, and unhealthy. So I can imagine, it's just a lot.
Comment and a question.
Yes, sir.
The comment is, I talked with Stacey Abrams about doing a line item veto for the crisis pregnancy centers, and she said she would do a line item veto on those in the budget. So she's got my vote for that just by that alone.
Good.
The other thing is, and I need to give you some background on it, I've had conversations with some colleagues of mine. If I talk to a neonatologist about Planned Parenthood and about abortion, the majority of them, excuse me, have been opposed to Planned Parenthood. And from their perspective, I've asked different questions, and one of the things is that neonatology has gotten to the point where you can take care of basically a fetus before it's even viable outside of the womb. And so they're coming from it from that perspective. Whereas the ER docs and about 50-50 the OB-GYNs are more in favor of Planned Parenthood. But one of the things that, and I've had an ongoing conversation with a neonatologist, that I'd like to read to you what he had written to me, and I just wanted to get your comments on it. And again, I'm the messenger on this, and I'm trying to find the answer to it.
It's not the first time I've been asked a hard question.
Okay, I figured that. So, RE Planned Parenthood, no matter what kind of shell game they play with federal and other government funding, it supports the primary business of abortion and birth control. They have developed a cataloging of services which breaks services down into multiple service items: counseling, pregnancy tests, ultrasound, possibly pain medication, are all separate services for a woman obtaining an abortion. So the abortion here is actually 20% of the service. A visit for a pap smear and birth control might also include counseling, 3 service calls. It's absurd to claim that abortion is only 3% of Planned Parenthood business. The Leiden tapes, which I'll ask you about later at dinner.
We're getting in it.
What is going on at Planned Parenthood is clear. They have never performed a mammogram. they claim to support adoption. Really, Planned Parenthood performed 321,384 abortions during its last fiscal year, while offering only 3,889 adoption referrals. They are unable to treat medical conditions like blood pressure, diagnosed breast cancer, and it is not clear at all if any pregnancy care that the group provides, since they don't report or track this.
Okay, so there's a lot in that.
Yes, there is.
Okay, well, first let me go back to Abrams.
Sure.
Yes, she has told us the same. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons we've endorsed her is the use of a veto pen, right? And for her, choice is a non-negotiable, as is the death penalty. No matter who writes the bill or where it comes from, right? So I think she's the champion that women and families need in Georgia. So we try to remember everything that was in there. We've never claimed to provide mammograms. We do the first step in breast health, which is a clinical breast exam. So if you don't have breasts, you don't know, but the first thing that any physician or nurse practitioner will do is what's called a clinical breast exam. That's a touch exam of the breast. And if there are issues, then we make referrals out, and we actually have a pretty intense follow-up process with our referred patients once they're out of our care, out of our scope of care, to make sure they're getting care, and even sometimes helping fund that care. So I think that's come up before, the mammogram issue. I think what I don't know the gender of the person that you were reading from, it sounds like they were talking about insurance billing around services.
Bundling and unbundling.
Okay. Well, this is a really common practice in medicine, right? To make sure you're getting reimbursed for all the services that you're provided. And I will tell you that there is no insurance company or Medicaid, especially in the South, maybe true it's definitely different on the West Coast, that actually covers the cost of providing care, just paying for the staff and the medication and the supplies. So billing an insurance policy for all of the pieces of the services is pretty common practice, and certainly something that we do. Now, I heard the 3% thing too, so that often you'll hear somewhere between 3 and 10% of our services nationally are abortion, which is actually true. It's different for us here in the South because there's so little access. We're actually providing more than that abortion, so I think it differs around the country. But aggregate, that actually is true, and not something we shy away from. But I think for me, I know it's not responsive, but for me, one of the things I challenge our family about, our Planned Parenthood family, is that's not the forward message, is only 10% of what we do is abortion. It's not only, it's a part of what we do, and it's an important part of what we do. The Delighten tapes. So some of you may remember in 2015, and this is not a new strategy, so there are folks out there that don't like what we do. And there are states around the country, including Georgia here, that are single-party consent for recording, meaning you didn't have to get my permission to record this today. And this group in particular, Delighten and colleagues, created a fake company, created fake government IDs, fake tax returns, and claimed to be fetal tissue specialists or tissue disposal specialists, and came as vendors to our national conference and got into our health centers, sat down with our doctors, and videotaped it and started to release videos claiming that we were doing something we didn't do. Those folks have had a number of federal charges charged against them now. And in every state, including here in Georgia, where we were investigated, we were found innocent of any wrongdoing. So literally on a Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m., the Department of Community Health showed up at every one of our health centers looking for us doing something wrong related to abortion. I mean, literally opening the fridges in the staff lounge. And had to write a letter to Governor Deal saying there was nothing found. And that's true across the country. So this is a group who did something illegal to try to shut down the work that we do around abortion related to fetal tissue donation. And the only time that ever happens is in a situation where, one, there is a research relationship, right, and a secondary consent by the woman. So the first consent is for, do you want to have an abortion, right? And then if they do, and they're in a place, which for us is a very small handful, of places that were actually doing that, then they will talk to women about a fetal tissue donation program. So that whole thing, that was a very hard moment for us at Planned Parenthood because that was a group that got very up close and personal. I mean, across the lunch table from our physicians and in a room this close to Cecile Richards. You know, that's pretty scary from a security standpoint for us. But they did something very illegal, which doesn't stop people from doing that. But it's been proven out in courts and through regulatory environments. I think those are some of the issues that got raised there. Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say, unfortunately, we have to spend a lot of time dealing with security, and whether it's physical security or cyber security. I know, you know, and cybersecurity is just constantly changing, but after these videos happened, we also ended up with a pretty significant cyber attack on our website and had to take it down. The Department of Justice and FBI got involved. And we just couldn't stay ahead of the hackers. And you know, for some folks, it's sport, right? They're just out there trying to hack whatever they can just for fun. And we had to shut the whole system down. Our patients couldn't get access, our donors couldn't get access, people couldn't do our text-to-chat program. We just literally had our millionth text-to-chat program. We have a really cool thing, you know, you just text a number and you get health information on your phone. And we had to shut all of that down, you know, because that happens. And we, you know, have to hire the leader in cybersecurity, you know, to come in and evaluate us and do all these things. I wish that we didn't have to spend the time on the security stuff and honestly the policy stuff too. I just wish we could provide healthcare and education every day. And, you know, I mean, one of my favorite bumper stickers is "Against abortion, don't have one," right? I mean, it is not for me to tell you what to do with your body and what decisions to make in your life and what's best for you. And listen, we just don't walk in each other's shoes. You know, all the time in Florida, I would see in our parking lot, Florida has an anti-choice license plate. I'd see them in our parking lot, our patients there. We're not there to judge, right? That license plate money is going to crisis pregnancy centers in Florida. But if they need our care, we're there for them in a very non-judgmental way, and I just wish that's the stuff that we got to focus on every day. And we didn't have to worry about our poor staff who have to worry about folks like Delyden and his crew. These are entry-level staff working at front desks in health centers just wanting to provide care to other humans every day who have to be worried that somebody's recording them or somebody's there under false pretenses. That's just ridiculous in my mind, and I wish we didn't have to worry about that. I wish we didn't have to rent cars so our doctors and staff could show up, who come to us, who don't normally work at those health centers, don't have to come in their own and don't get identified. You know, because we have protesters outside our health centers, even in Atlanta. They take license plates down, they learn who people are, and they'll call you by name. They're harassing patients as they're coming and going, as if, you know, fundamentally for me, it is about autonomy and trusting that human to make their own decisions, as if someone who walks into a health center or a clinic for a vasectomy, or someone who walks into a health center or a clinic for an abortion has not thoroughly thought about that before they walk in, right? As if it was like, oh, vasectomy's here today, the yard sign, and I'm going to go in and get one today, right? That just doesn't happen. Like these waiting periods that we put on women who in states that they have to wait after they've decided to have an abortion, then they have to go through counseling and they have to hear all this state-mandated, non-medically accurate information. We can't just trust women to make their own decisions. Clearly I can get on a soapbox about that, but I just think it's a really, really unfortunate time, and I think it's only getting worse. So, you know, I think that the support, the telling your story is so important right now. So, Kenan, did I get at everything in there, do you think? Okay, thanks. You asked me all the hard stuff at once.
Could you just briefly list again all of the services you provide to men?
Oh, yeah. So we do testicular exams. So that, again, it's just like a clinical breast exam, sort of the first stage in cancer diagnosis. STD testing and treatment. And some of our health centers provide vasectomy services as well.
Are not men the largest growing population that are seeking Planned Parenthood care?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have people of all gender identities coming in more and more. Right. A lot of our health centers, we're not yet, but a lot of our health centers across the country are specifically providing transgender care. I think that's really cool. And I think the other thing I didn't mention, Kenan, in your paragraph was something about pregnancy care. So an adoption referral, sorry. So we do pregnancy options counseling. Everybody who walks in, unlike what it sounds like you might have experienced, we're going to talk them through all the options if they want, or we're going to talk to them about specific options depending on what the information is they want, and then give them the information they need to go make decisions with their faith, family, friends, for whatever happens next. Most times, either people are coming in for pregnancy confirmation or they're coming to us because they have an unplanned pregnancy. So that's why our adoption referrals are lower. But our health centers are all equipped with that, all have strong relationships with adoption agencies. And we do have some Planned Parenthoods that do like first or second trimester prenatal care, but that's not part of the scope of care that we provide at Planned Parenthood on a regular basis at all Planned Parenthoods, but some do. So it kind of just depends. Yes.
Question. So locally, what do we have here? Do we have a clinic, a physical clinic?
You do not have a Planned Parenthood here. You do have an independent abortion provider here who likely also provides, I don't know a lot about the clinic, but they also provide probably access to birth control. It's standard of care when we see a woman for abortion care that we make sure that her contraceptive needs are met after abortion. So depending on the type of abortion she chooses, we can actually insert a LARC right after her abortion procedure, or make sure she goes home with pills, right, so that she's protected immediately after her abortion.
Go ahead and speak.
Could you take a photo? I'm sorry.
Yes. I can't hear Carolyn, you know that.
What other questions can I answer? I know it's sort of a hard topic to dig into on a Sunday afternoon, so I'm really grateful everyone came out and just to hear. Yes, ma'am.
Where is the abortion clinic here in Columbus?
Does anybody know?
Do you know where Warm Springs and
Where?
it's off of Rosemont Drive.
Near the Red Cross.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Between-
New Horizons.
between
It's right down
Red
the
Cross
street from New Horizons.
and St. Francis.
Yeah.
There.
Is that?
It's like right behind the women's clinic.
Oh, behind
Yeah.
So what did you say there was locally, a board or some kind of
Well,
council?
we don't have anything locally here, but one of the things that has been happening, especially since the election in 2016, is that in places where we don't have health centers, we have folks that are interested in sex ed policy or our electoral work or just advocating and talking about Planned Parenthood. Well, we have advisory councils that form. So I was just sort of describing it as a way to get involved if there was a group of folks interested in doing that.
Are there any states that don't have access to abortion at home?
Yeah, there are. Actually, South Dakota is one of them. Sorry, I'm pointing at Bill because that's where he's from.
I didn't hear the question.
Where there is no abortion access.
Oh,
South Dakota, Iowa right now, under a 6-week ban. I mean, abortions don't happen before then. So I think Wyoming, maybe. I'm trying to think. It's not because they don't have access, they don't have providers. I think those are just the 2 states.
What does women have to do?
Well, they travel. Women on average travel 100 miles to get to an abortion provider, and 9 times out of 10 they have to go more than once because of these waiting periods.
Right.
You know, Georgia has a 24-hour waiting period, but it's counseling that can happen over the phone, so she doesn't have to come in twice. But in Alabama, it's 48 hours and she has to come in twice. In Texas, it's 72 hours and she has to come in twice and see the same physician. So they have to have the same physician there for counseling as they will the day of services. And so that's sort of where I go back to the trusting women. We actually challenged this in Alabama. It was really interesting to hear the state respond to this access issue, right? So if you, I mean, just, you know, your day-to-day healthcare, right? Like even if you have to have a dentist appointment and you have a job that you can't get off of to go to the dentist, right, during normal business hours, it's really hard, right? And if you have a family and childcare and all that. So imagine if you're a woman, you decided that you wanted to seek abortion care, right? You had to drive over 100 miles to get somewhere. So we were talking about Alabama at the time. We were actually talking about Columbus as one of the closest places they could get to. And the state saw no problem with women having to juggle 2 visits, childcare, taking off from work, or spending the night in a hotel, whatever. That didn't seem like undue burden to the state of Alabama. Luckily, Judge Myron Thompson agreed that it was undue burden, but it's sort of amazing that what we are okay with people putting up with to get access to health care these days, whether it's, sexual and reproductive health care or any health care. I mean, this is the maternal mortality issue. In Alabama, I mean, if you're in, you're outside of Birmingham, you're outside of Auburn, right? There is no place to go for prenatal care. There's actually no place to go to deliver a baby, right? You can have to drive 30 minutes, an hour to get somewhere to deliver in, the rural South, which is no wonder that we deal with such horrible outcomes related to maternal mortality. I just think it's ludicrous that women are dying just because they get pregnant and they want to be pregnant. Yes, ma'am.
If the Alabama constitutional amendment passes, what does that mean for the state of Alabama?
It doesn't mean anything immediately. Basically, it will stay on the Constitution. It's really hard to get stuff off the Constitution. I'm not a big fan of changing constitutions. I mean, it will stay on the Constitution. But what it really means is that if, as I was mentioning, if Roe gets overturned, if the states can then decide whether or not abortion should be legal or not in the state, then Alabama will have already made its decision. So abortion will be banned in the state of Alabama, should that happen. And like I said earlier, it can have far-reaching implications, into things like access to birth control or emergency contraception or any fertility treatment. We're actually fighting this in West Virginia as well. They have a similar ballot initiative. In 2011, we fought something kind of similar in Mississippi and actually won. It was a personhood amendment to basically declare the fetus the same rights that you and I have outside the womb, which, in a vehicular homicide situation sounds, like something you might want, right? Like if a pregnant woman got into a car accident and she loses the pregnancy or they both die, right? You can understand where sort of that emotional comes from. But then when you look at the broader implications of what that means, right? You're not just talking about abortion. You're talking about, things like birth control. So, but these, as I mentioned, these are efforts that often we see the right using to, one, distract resources from the election, right? So we actually had a possible personhood amendment on the ballot in Georgia. It was introduced last year, so it was still open this session. But so to detract resources from getting the candidates elected, right? And then also just for policy's sake and for voter turnout. It's been a very effective tactic.
That's very interesting because H.R. 586, which was introduced by a Georgia Congressman, Jody Hice, that put personhood at the point of conception even before fetal development.
Right. That's what the Mississippi ballot initiative was about. We've seen that all over the country. I think we beat it 5 times in Colorado.
That many times?
And they keep introducing it. It's expensive, too, those ballot initiatives. It's not a cheap endeavor. What else? Anything else? I brought some, a little bit of Planned Parenthood swag if anybody wants something pink to take home, a pen, or I'm a good Southerner, so I always have a koozie in my pocket, or a button. If you want some more information, I also brought our sign-up sheet. I'm happy to get you on our list. I know, depending on how you feel about emails, lists can be a good thing or a frustrating thing. I think it's a really cool thing because you can really be an armchair activist these days, right? You just hit reply and a letter goes off. I mean, you can do the text. I love that. I don't know if anybody's done that, the Resist bot, where you can actually text and it will send a fax to your legislature and you can tell them what to fax. I always just send you thank you faxes to Congressman Lewis. I also hear good things about your mayor. And exciting possibilities. So I'm going to keep a close tab on that. I know Senator Perdue pretty well. He's from Perry. I know the Perdue's being Warner Robins. So, I think between Perdue and Isaacson, I don't know if you paid attention, but last year, Isaacson had been gone for a long time, right? out sick, but literally got called in and literally got wheeled in to vote against women's access to birth control. So I think we know where they stand. Well, thank y'all for the work that you're doing in this community. It's so important, and to keep it up. I'm really grateful for what you're doing and grateful for the time today. So thank you for the invitation.
May we get a group picture?
Oh yeah, let's do it.